All right, well, let me just say good evening, everyone. My name's Alan Freedman, Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and I'm your MC for this evening. I'm joined by our President, David Adler, who you've just heard from, and depending where they're located on your screen, there's also our Executive Director, Ted Lapkin. So good evening to you, David and Ted. In this time of coronavirus and virtual lockdown, I imagine the people at Zoom must be delighted at how business has taken a turn for the better, but it's a good platform and it's being widely used for events such as this. So the topic for this evening's chat is Israel's new unity government, and the agenda is as follows. Our guest speaker, Barry Shaw, will chat with us and outline his thoughts on this for about 20 minutes, after which we will take written questions from the audience. Now, the way to submit a question is to type and send it to me via the chat function, but no long commentaries, please, just a sentence or two on some aspect of the discussion. We decided to do a written Q&A because unlike a physical live event, it's very hard to engage in the same way, and we think the written questions will be better. So very briefly, for those who are not sure how to do this, hover your mouse cursor at the bottom of the Zoom screen and you'll see some icons. In the middle of the toolbar, you will see a chat icon. If you don't, you'll need to enter full screen by clicking in the top right-hand corner or clicking on the More button at the right-hand end of the toolbar. Now, when you click this button, it will open up a chat window that can be dragged to the side of the screen, and at the bottom of this window, people can make a comment to the whole group. But for a question, please just send it to me using the drop-down menu. Now, also on the far left of the toolbar is a microphone icon for audio, but we'll be having muted, and also one to start and stop the video or camera function if you so choose. So we are going to mute the discussion, as it can be very distracting to the group if there are dogs barking and people chatting and clattering going on in the background if your microphone happens to be on. So that's all from me by way of introduction. I'm going to ask Ted Lapkin, the Executive Director of the AJA, to introduce our guest speaker. Thanks, Ted.
Well, thank you, Alan. Our guest speaker tonight is Barry Shaw. He's speaking to us from Israel, and he is a Senior Associate for Public Diplomacy at the Israel Institute of Strategic Studies, which is an independent pro-Zionist research center and think tank founded by Dr. Martin Sherman. You can find them on Facebook or at strategic-israel.org, and they're well worth supporting, and they produce top-notch, high-quality stuff. Barry Shaw regularly contributes to various media outlets, including the Jerusalem Post. He's a frequent speaker at conferences and pro-Israel advocacy events. He has, for many years, been a staunch defender of Israel in the public domain and the public diplomacy arena, and has initiated the creation of several pro-Israel grassroots groups. He's the author of 3 books on Israel advocacy, which are, you can find them on Amazon: Israel Reclaiming the Narrative, which rebuts fraudulent allegations against Israel with fact-based refutations; Fighting Hamas, BDS, and Anti-Semitism, which is a thoroughly researched exposure of Jew hatred at the heart of the Palestinian cause from their headquarters in Gaza and Ramallah. So we're talking about both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority in campuses, and anti-Israel activism in far too many, unfortunately, Western countries. And his most recent book is BDS For Idiots, employs ridicule as a new method of countering BDS activists and repudiating their slander against Israel with facts and humor. And again, nothing, as we have found out in public debate, satire and sarcasm are very, very effective weapons. So please welcome Barry Shaw.
Thanks, Ted. Thank you, and thanks, Barry. So Barry, good evening for us, good afternoon to you. Welcome to our session. Barry, it appears that Israeli society is split down the middle politically between the 2 major parties, Is this how Israel got itself into this position in the first place?
It got itself in this position in the first place, I think, because the country became somewhat split with the charges that Benjamin Netanyahu was facing and his impending trial. And it made quite a few people disillusioned, and some people thought it was time for a change of leadership.
Right. So what's your overview of this whole situation? Where's it all going to go? How do you think it will function?
Well, okay, we have about a week or so to go before we get the new what's called emergency unity government approved. But just to stage it for your viewers, listeners who are watching, just give some background to catch up. I want to take you back to the last election campaign, in which the other alternative party, if you like, to Likud, Bibi's Likud, the Blue and White Party, headed by 3 former IDF commanders, pledged to their voters that they would never seek to establish a coalition with the anti-Zionist Joint Arab List. But when the results came in, they did precisely that. They did decide to go in with the Joint Arab List. To quote one of the people who were leading that, Moshe Boigi Ya'alon, somebody I call a friend, and it's a man who I had previously admired, not so much as a politician, no, because he was still fresh. In fact, I helped him get some speaking engagements in Netanya and Ra'anana here in Israel. But when we had this standoff between Blue and White, trying to cobble a coalition together, and also Likud, I'll quote Moshe Ya'alon, and I'm quoting his words here. "The election puts us in the position of choosing which election promise to break. In this situation, removing Netanyahu is the main goal. We have no choice but to rely on the Joint Arab List." I was shocked by this statement, because what Moshe Ya'alon was saying was that he would ditch a Zionist leader in favor of a collection of communists, Islamists, and radical Arab nationalists clubbing together, who have a raging hatred of Israel and collectively want to do an end of Israel as a Jewish state. It had been previously headed by a leader called Azmi Bashara, who had to escape from Israel, to run away just moments before he was going to be arrested on treason charges for giving important intelligence to Hezbollah. And here we have Blue and White preferring to go into a coalition with these bunch of people rather than with the Likud, even headed by Bibi. But what they did afterwards, the second thing before I come on to this, to bring us up to date, is when this tactic didn't work because it received absolute outrage by quite a large proportion of the Israeli electorate, what they tried to do then was to remove Yuli Edelstein, the Knesset speaker, a Likudnik, in order to put somebody of their own in there in order to change a law. And a law which says that any prime minister can continue being prime minister even if he's indicted, but that he cannot become prime minister if he is found guilty. They wanted to change that law into one that says that any prime minister facing indictment cannot continue as prime minister. And a lot of the electorate saw this as not only being democratic, but as a personal sort of law in order to stage a coup. So this brings us into the situation we have now, Alan, of this unity government.
So
where we are today.
What sort of numbers are we likely to see in the Knesset?
The unity government will have about 64, 65 supporters, let's say, putting it that way.
Yes.
But what concerns me about the unity government, Alan, is not being formed, in my opinion, for the voters beyond maybe avoiding a fourth election, but that has become a gargantuan, overblown government that is going to cost us a fortune at a critical time in our economic meltdown right now. We have, partly as an answer to you, this new government will have 54 ministers and deputy ministers. Now, just think what this is. This means additional ministerial offices, staffers, costs, expenses. Each minister gets a car and a driver. Each minister gets a security attachment. I don't believe that any of these politicians will agree to a pay cut in order to, for the sake of the nation, for the economic safety of the nation. But they will have expense accounts. And if they last 3 years, they will be entitled to a life pension based on their high salaries.
Mm. And I mean, really, the government needs some sort of reform, doesn't it? The whole system. Can you see that happening at all?
Not with our democracy at steroids, especially at this critical point. You know, adding to what I've said, you know, what we will have now from next week onwards, or a couple of weeks' time, we will have 2 de facto prime ministers. This also means finding an official residence for the replacement prime minister, which will need renovating, securing, furnishing, staffing, and operating. Another expense.
Mm. And the plan is that they're going to swap after 18 months. I suppose, I mean, the question is, is Bibi Netanyahu able to simply collapse the government at the end of the first 18 months and say, sorry guys, it hasn't worked, we're going to another election?
Okay, let me put it this way. If Bibi is deemed to be unfit to serve as Prime Minister by the High Court during the first 6 months I'm talking now, according to the agreement, Benny Gantz must resign and we must have a new election. But if Bibi pushes to dissolve the Knesset and calls an early election himself, Gantz, according to the agreement, becomes the acting Prime Minister heading into an election and will remain in that post until a new government is formed.
Right. So and presumably that was designed to stop any fun and games happening there.
Yeah, but we're talking about fun and games. This is part of the Israeli House of Cards, Alan. I want to add another rider to what you asked. There's another option open to Bibi. For instance, this new government is going to be for a 3-year term. And the agreement is that Bibi will start off as the acting Prime Minister for 18 months and then be replaced by Benny Gantz. Okay? So knowing that in mind, Bibi, what he can do is he will begin the 3-year term as acting Prime Minister, but instead of serving for 18 months, if he decides, for instance, after a year, maybe it's because the trial would have him say to Benny Gantz, you know what, you take over your 18 months now, or for whatever reason, right? Benny Gantz will serve his 18 months, and then Bibi is entitled to finish off that 3-year unity government, so he could have the last 6 months, for instance, going into a new election as the acting Prime Minister at the end of the term of that 3-year government.
So they get 18 months.
I'm sure our viewers and listeners here, their heads are spinning, but we've only just begun.
So they get 18 months each, but it doesn't actually have to be consecutive.
Don't have to be, no, not at all. It depends how they play it.
Well, so in terms of the charges against Bibi, where does that all stand? What happens with that?
All right, well, the trial is due to start on May the 24th. And the current law says that the Prime Minister could continue to serve the country even if he's facing trial until such time as he's found guilty. I said that before. But one of the tactics that the Blue and White passing was to change this existing law. And this would basically bar an indicted leader from doing this. But as I said to you before, many people saw this as a political coup. It didn't take place.
Mm. And okay, so are there any implications for the judicial system? I mean, in Australia, we have the judicial system is very much separate from the government, but in America, it's not like that. What's the situation like in Israel?
Yeah, well, Bibi's always protested that the accusations and indictments against him have been a stitch-up job, as part of a political coup against him by people who know they can't gain power by political means. But there's a new thing going on right now, in which there's a battle going on between the Attorney General and the current state prosecutor, where the current state prosecutor has said that he has evidence against the Attorney General being the one that is putting the trial together against Bibi, to say that he was involved in 2010 in a cover-up that involved Gabi Ashkenazi, who was Benny Gantz's second in command. He brought him over to join this unity government. Benny Gantz was trying to continue for a second term as the IDF chief of staff, and he was being challenged by Yoav Gallant, another one, and they were trying to dig up dirt on Yoav Gallant, and apparently, according to the state prosecutor, Mandelblit, the Attorney General, was in on the cover-up on some of the information that should have come forward, was prevented from doing so. In fact, the news today has been that the High Court has decreed that the prosecutor, the state prosecutor, must resign from his position. And it only adds to the conspiracy theory of what's going on behind the scenes that are targeting people like Bibi, and in this case, the state prosecutor.
So what do the Israeli people think about all of this? Are you happy that at least you've got a functioning government, or not? Or where do most people sit?
Well, as we saw with the election, let me put it this way. Benny Gantz and Blue and White tried 3 times to win an election against an injured prime minister because he was facing potential indictments, and he lost all 3 times. So the majority of votes, let's say the Jewish votes in Israel, still solidly behind Bibi. And if the local, the way that Bibi has managed the virus crisis here in Israel, I think he's won himself even more fans for his leadership.
Yeah. A question from Michael is, can Benny Gantz in his term overturn any decisions made by Netanyahu?
That's a good question. But this is why it comes back to something that I've said before. I think we've got here a sort of a stalemate. We have a system over here that, for instance, to answer the question, if Benny Gantz wants to advance something that Bibi doesn't agree with, then it could be vetoed. But same the other way around. If Bibi wants to advance something in the first 6 months that Benny Gantz doesn't approve of, he can veto it either as well. And it goes beyond that, even into the ministerial positions. So during what's called the unity stage, we have, first of all, we have 6 months called the emergency stage. But then after 6 months, it becomes known as the unity phase. So if we have, for instance, I'll take one committee. The Ministerial Committee for Legislation is headed by a Gantz minister and has a deputy Likud minister. But they can stalemate each other at any time on any proposed bill in the Knesset. They either both have to agree or nothing gets done. And this, in my opinion, is a recipe for a stagnant government.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what I guess time will tell, and we'll see how it actually plays out. But it could be a complete disaster, couldn't it?
Well, this is it. I mean, you've got a government here that really it is going to be very difficult to pass any active motions or bills going forward unless both sides agree to do it. But I can see a lot of debris being left behind.
Well, they've obviously gone into this arrangement in some sense of desperately needed cooperation. I guess they're going to have to find a way to cooperate. Otherwise, it's just going to be a waste of time.
Yep. Well, there's a bright hope, perhaps, in for instance, if I can move the conversation going, According to the signed agreement of the unity government, application of Israeli law in parts of Judea and Samaria can be advised by Bibi after the 1st of July, even without Benny Gantz's okay. Now, the surprising condition of this is that as a condition of agreeing to join the unity government, the Labour leader, Amir Peretz, had to agree that he would vote with the government on what would be for him and his supporters a very controversial issue. You wanted me to talk about the potential annexation now, or keep it till later?
No, we'll get to that. Just tell us. I've got a few people asking you about the Labor Party. So tell us, where does this leave the Labor Party in terms of their role in the government?
Well, the Labour Party up to the last election was on a respirator, and it's still on a respirator even after the election. It was led by Amir Peretz, who virtually has killed the Labour Party. You have to remember the Labour Party was a party that created, the Zionist party that created the state of Israel. But it ended up with about 4 members of the Knesset. And the only reason that Amir Peretz and another couple are still hanging around is because they went into a coalition with an even further left party called Meretz, and a center-right parliamentarian called Orly Levy Abaxis, who was a daughter of David Levy, who was a Likudnik. And somehow they scrambled over the threshold and they got sufficient votes to be in there. But they were going to join the blue and white and Lieberman in a coalition against Bibi and the Likud. But what happened is, when Gantz and Ashkenazi and a few others decided to leave blue and white and join in a unity government, Amir Peretz, first of all, Orly Levy Abaxis decided to leave her grouping and go in with Bibi, but then also Amir Peretz decided to join, to try and put a left-wing tinge to this unity government. So he is in the unity government. My only fear is that people like Amir Peretz and another blue and white member of the Knesset by the name of Avi Nissenkorn will have roles, or I hope not ministerial roles, to do with the economy, finance, trade, or justice, because Israel is prospering by having a Bibi-inspired free market economy. And I would hate to go back to a socialist type of economy that these people can introduce. Don't forget, Nissenkorn, I have to tell you, was the leader of the Histadrut, which is the Israeli trade union organization. Yeah,
just a question from Brian. What about the petition to the High Court to block Netanyahu forming a government?
He can't they can't block Bibi forming a government or this unity government. They don't have it in their power to do that. The only thing that the High Court can do would be to receive a claim or a brief in order to try and get the Knesset to change a law. This is the law I spoke about earlier, or maybe impose something from the High Court that no prime minister can serve as prime minister while undergoing a trial.
Yeah.
But this presupposes it's a dangerous law to make, and there would be the implications there, political interference by the High Court that even Bibi is accusing, by the simple notion that a person is considered innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah. So does the unity government have any mandate or policies? This is a question from Sue and Terry. I mean, how do you go into running a country without a cohesive set of aims and goals and people understanding what you want to do?
Well, any bills or issues that are being raised in the Knesset that need to come up to a vote, whether you're passing anything to do with social justice, economic things, even international relations, security. These can be done both in cabinet and in the Knesset. I see that perhaps this government could do very well dealing with things like security, for instance. I see, perhaps on security issues, that Bibi and Gantz and some others may see eye to eye in both internal and external dangers to Israel, both in the region here with our dangerous Palestinian neighbors, Hezbollah in Lebanon, what's going on in Syria, even Iran. I don't think there'll be any problem there on these major issues. There may be problems on the economy. How does this unity government get Israel back on its feet again after lockdown? How does it save the economy? How does it care for the people who have been unemployed and maybe remain unemployed? How to improve the health service? Incidentally, I may have some breaking news. It's not been approved. But as you know, the previous health minister was Litzman from the ultra-Orthodox United Torah thing. It's rumored over here, we may hear within the next day or two, that the new health minister may be Naftali Bennett.
Oh, okay. I was going to
give you the breaking news, Alan.
I was going to ask you about Yaakov Litzman because, of course, here in Australia we have a vested interest in the health minister in Israel because of the Malka Leifer affair. From over here, we observed his whole role in the Leifer affair as we observed it with a lot of cynicism. Did the Malka Leifer issue get much attention in Israel? How did you see all of that?
About what the Leifer between what?
Malka Leifer is the Australian teacher who was accused of abusing girls in school. She was spirited away from Melbourne overnight, and she's been in Israel for several years, and there's been about 50 or so hearings to determine whether she's fit to be repatriated. Yeah. So obviously this is not a major issue because you weren't all that familiar with it.
Yeah, no, I know about it. Yes, quite frankly, my personal opinion, she should be extradited back to Australia to face trial.
For sure.
Absolutely. She shouldn't be protected. And I think there is an amount of protection going on here via the ultra-Orthodox community, putting pressure on the Bibi not to do something. And I think that's totally wrong.
Well, it smacks of corruption, doesn't it?
It smells of political looking after self-interest, let's put it that way.
Okay.
But corruption, yes. I mean, anybody who is guilty of any sort of sexual assault should be investigated. It's not our job to investigate her over here. If she's being sentenced over there in Australia, and she shouldn't be seeking shelter, and she should be sheltered over here.
No, absolutely. We'll just continue with a couple of the other political parties. Question from Mary. Regarding Yair Lapid and Yesh Atid, what is he going to play a spoiler role, or how do you see his role in the new government?
Yair Lapid has now become the leader of the opposition, and he would be trying to unite the ranks and lead the ranks in opposing a lot of the stuff that the unity government will be trying to do. I think there'll be a number of things he would, even as member of the opposition, have to agree with, because he'd be looking also forward 3 years' time, or maybe something before if this unity government breaks up ahead of time. And he doesn't want to spoil it for the middle ground, the center left and the center right, let's say, by going too far off the beaten track in opposing what the unity government may be trying to do for the benefit of the ordinary Israeli citizens.
Does he have much popularity remaining?
He thinks he does. But he wasn't, he tried to use his charismatic best when he had his own party. He realized he wasn't going to be more than maybe a party of maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 seats. This is why he went in with people like Gantz and Ashkenazi and Ya'alon, because they thought they'd become a power group, which they did. But this fractured, and it fractured basically because Yair Lapid was also pushing the other people to go into the coalition with people, with parties and individuals totally unacceptable to the majority of the Israeli voters.
Mm.
So he's got to learn more how to steer a more of a political course. He's still a novice, let's say.
Barry, is it fair to say that the differences between all of between most of these centrist parties is more on involving domestic issues rather than national issues?
Well, I think domestic issue, all are national issues. You're talking about internally or externally?
Well, I mean, in terms of Israel's security, the relationship with the Palestinian Arabs, all that sort of thing, is there a lot of divergence between these various guys, and really what they're arguing about is all the local stuff?
Yes, I think you're right there, because Israel still feels itself, although we're a powerhouse in the Middle East, in fact internationally, we do still see ourselves, we have this Jewish complex of living in the ghetto. We still, at the end of it all, see ourselves living in a tiny state, surrounded by virile enemies who want to destroy us. Both across all our borders and even further afield. And we have to be on our guard all the time. That's why, to us, the army gains everybody's respect, as you probably saw over there when it came to Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaTzmaut.
Yes.
And the army itself had been playing a remarkable role over here, even during the virus crisis, in helping with the police, but also helping with the welfare and the health departments, bringing food to the elderly in nursing homes, and helping with some of the testings and whatever. They've been playing an amazing role, even helping constructing some of the temporary hospitals and places.
Right. Barry, tell us about, you mentioned Naftali Bennett before. Tell us about Yamina. Where do they fit into the whole picture?
Yeah, you know, the problem I think that Bibi is going to have out of this is he's given up so many major ministries and everything to his opposing parties that I think he's tended to leave not only a supporting minority group like Yamina behind, but also even his own party. A lot of the leading members of the Likud are not going to have ministerial roles, some of those that they had before. So I think he might end up with a bit of a mutiny within his own party. I sincerely hope that both Naftali Bennett and even Ayelet Shaked of the Yamina party will be given ministerial roles because they're experienced politicians and they've been successful in their past roles. But I think he ought to also take more care of the people in his own party, whose, I think, quite a few noses will be left out of joint, because having given so much up to Blue and White and the Labour Party, and even Gesher, which is the Orly, Levy, that he's left some of his old people behind, and he may rue the day that he did this.
But I mean, clearly that had to happen in order to form a government. So these people that he's left behind, are they likely to agitate? Are they likely to cause trouble? What do you see happening?
I think they'll remain silent. It'll be like a bit of a mutiny on the bounty. They'll stay quiet while and they will support the government. I'm not saying they're going to rebel against it. They will support the government, but they'll be pressuring for roles. The problem is going to be, this is basically a part of an answer to somebody asked something earlier, that the problem with why I call this a stagnation unity government is that even if there is, for instance, a Blue and White minister who is incompetent in his role, it is not possible for Bibi or Likud to oppose him and have him removed without Gantz, for instance, agreeing to do so. So we could be heading into a unity government of incompetence. And this is why I am not too hopeful that it's going to be terribly successful in dealing with a number of domestic issues, because with a bloated government, you're going to have quite a number of inexperienced and incompetent ministers and deputy ministers, which is going to drag progress down quite a lot.
Well, the word that's sort of flashing at me is the word compromise. And I mean, Israelis are not known for their willingness to compromise. So I suspect you may be right. There could be a lot of trouble. But Barry, just tell us about the ultra-Orthodox, the religious parties. Bibi's very clearly accommodating them up till now. What happens going forward?
Well, here we have the example of Litzman, who resigned as health minister. That position and that party is still vital for Bibi, even if he's looking forward to 2023. The question is he going to give Litzman another ministry in order to keep that party sweet? And this is where he's going to have some pressure by some of the Likud ministers. For instance, they're talking about giving him the construction ministry or the housing ministry, which obviously means that a large budget of that will go for housing communities, new communities for the ultra-Orthodox around the place. And that could make it very unpopular for Bibi, who would want, you know, housing for the young people and secular people or whatever. But my feeling is that somebody like Litzman or somebody else from his party will be given one or two ministries of that on the back of, like I said before, some of maybe the more competent Likud ministers. Yeah.
Just one more final question on the makeup of the government, and then we'll move on to other topics. Avigdor Lieberman, he seems to have been the instigator for a lot of all of the issues, and I guess they called him the kingmakers, but so where is he now?
Come the next election, I think his party, Israel Beitenu, is going to crash. Lieberman himself is seen as a wrecking ball. Some people have called him a political prostitute. He's gone from being on the far right to be then opposing religious parties, to opposing the Arabs, to opposing Bibi. He's all over the shop. In the last election, he lives in a settlement called Nokdim. And in the area of his settlement, would you believe that Lieberman received only 2.8% of the vote in the area in which in the district in which he lived? I think in the next election, over his behavior in this last thing, he's obviously going to be spending 3 years in opposition. But I think in the next election, whether it's 3 years or less, I think the Likud will be gaining more votes from an Israel Beitenu, Lieberman-led Israel Beitenu in disarray.
Is this because of his hatred for Netanyahu and his obsession to just get rid of him rather than contribute to the government as a whole?
It's just that he looks like people look on him as a Russian bulldozer that has been all over the political map over the last few years. He started off as being right, even further to the right than the Likud, to becoming anti the religious party, mainly based because of he wanted to see more secular way of life being permitted in the major town, but also the fact that they weren't pulling the weight, the Orthodox, in sending their sons and daughters to serve in the IDF, to being opposed to the Arabs, to actually then preparing to sit with the Joint Arab List, which has got some of the biggest Israel haters. Nothing against the Arab members of the Knesset. I did a video interview with Dima Taya, who is a young Muslim girl who is a Zionist, and she is now a Likud candidate for a future Knesset. So nothing against Arab members of the Arabs fully deserve to have their representation. But the sort of personalities that have imposed themselves on them are doing them no great service. So coming back to Lieberman, he's all over the shop. He's just a complete wrecking ball.
And the Arab bloc is something that we puzzle about here in the diaspora. I mean, I look at some of the things that they're saying and argue that it's treasonous. And yet, how do they manage to keep going?
The Arab population in Israel, and let's put it this way, 20%, need to select the right sort of people who would represent them as an integral part of Israel in the Knesset. They don't have any right now. That's the danger. People there going there pretending to be representing their best interests, but they're not.
Okay, so let's move on to the big issue, annexation of Judea and Samaria. What are the implications with this new government for that?
Yeah, well, I mentioned before about the annexation thing. Whether the question is, I suppose you're asking, Alan, is Bibi going to take advantage of this prior to the after July the 1st? I'm not sure that he is. I think Bibi is going to take a gamble on this until after the presidential elections in the United States coming up in November. Some people are telling him that he better, try and have the imposition of Israeli law in Judea and Samaria done now, just in case Trump loses and we end up with a Biden presidency. If that ever happens, there's no Trump peace plan. We'll be back to the old dead camel of a two-state solution that's been dying, rotting in the desert sands for about 40 years, going nowhere, because these politicians, including Biden, including most of the Europeans, I'm not sure what's happening in the Australian government, don't realize that the two-state camel is dead, and you can't revive it, even with the most efficient ventilator.
I assure you that pretty well all of the communal organisations in Australia are wedded to the two-state solution, and if you try and talk about something other than the two-state solution, you get screamed down and told that you're an extremist
I have one solution to that none of the two-state solutions can tolerate. Fine. Israel in the past has proved itself ready for a two-state solution. You go and speak to Mahmoud Abbas and Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas and get them to sign up that they will agree with the two-state solution. The final details will be agreed between us and them with interlocutors. You try and get them to do it.
No.
If you do that, you will find that the majority of Israelis will agree to that. But let's stop kidding ourselves. Are you going to try dragging this dead camel to some distant oasis that you see as called peace for the next 50 years? It's not going to happen, and it's not because of Israel's fault.
Yeah. So in that context, what would most Israelis say about annexing or applying Israeli law to Judea and Samaria?
We will annex it for a couple of very good, sound, realistic, because I deal in real politics. Israel agreed to divide up Judea and Samaria into areas A, B, and C, according to the Oslo Accord. We kept our part of that bargain, where Area A is under the full, both military security and civil rule of the Palestinian Authority. Area B is under the civil authority of the Palestinian Authority and joint security mechanism. And Area C has always been designed, and I would advise your two staters to go back to the Oslo Accord and read it very carefully, that this remains fully, both militarily and civil, in Israeli possession until such time as a permanent peace agreement. There hasn't been one since Oslo. But what has happened in Area C, with the collusion of the European Union mainly, but others as well, the Palestinian Authority have been doing precisely what they're accusing Israel of. And this is transferring population into Area C, making veteran tribes, putting them in temporary homes, putting in temporary schools in Area C, in full breach of the Oslo Accord signed by the international community. In other words, the international community are themselves in criminal breach of an agreement they signed on to. So, putting it this way, Area C, part of Judea and Samaria, there would not be a breach of international law if Israel applies Israeli law on that territory. That's not to say if there was going to be, if suddenly, for instance, Mahatma Gandhi became the leader of the Palestinian Authority, and he wants part of that area, that Israel would not compromise. But we are not being soft in the head and soft in the political gut in order to trust ourselves in avowed enemies who, as of today, still have a pay-to-slay policy, who have rejected any proposal for peace. And the Arabs, the moderate Arabs, are totally fed up with them. And then you have in Gaza, the Hamas Muslim Brotherhood organization that have not given up 1 inch in never accepting any Jews in the Middle East.
Yeah, Barry, I'm just wondering, so you say most Israelis are happy to look at annexing at least Area C. And then what would happen if overnight a bus was gone, all of a sudden there was some moderate Palestinian leader who was prepared to negotiate? I mean, Israel wouldn't give up that right of annexation, would it?
I don't know what you're smoking, but Alan, but give me an example of a moderate Palestinian leader. Jibril Khajoub, Saib Arakat, Hanan Ashrawi, Ismaiah. Give me one.
No, but let's just say some young. I mean, I know. Look, I'm just pulling ideas out of the air.
You know, I'll smoke something. If I'll either smoke or drink, and I'll start dreaming. We've been dreaming, Alan, for 50 years.
Well, that's it.
The Arab nations, people like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, are fed up with them.
Well, yes, and I guess that's where I'm going.
I don't go for hallucination. This is the problem. What you're quoting what I call progressive, regressive language. Get real. Well, if you can find such a leader, find him. You will find most Israelis.
We know there isn't.
Most Israelis would go back and say, okay, if you want to make peace, maybe we'll give you this, but you have to live alongside the 600, 700, 800 Jews that are living in there. Because why? They're living in ancient land of Israel, in Judea and Samaria. What is Judea and Samaria? Where did the name Judea come from?
Well, obviously.
Yes, Arafat.
No.
Right.
But so there's a lot of world opinion against this view, isn't there? I mean, this is something that Israel has to live with.
Yes.
Do you care much about world opinion?
No. No, because it's cynically their own interests. And these people with their own self-interest are not interested in Israel. And what's happening in a lot of governments in the world, don't know about over there in Australia, but certainly in Europe, the people who are coming into power, coming to positions of influence and opinion making, are those who are coming out of the left-wing campuses.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that we have to surrender to their the brainwashing that's gone on, that cannot see Israel as it really is in the world. They always blame it on Israel. They never blame it on the Arabs,
no,
or the Palestinians, or Iran, or anybody. Just like the conversation we're going to have tomorrow on this coronavirus. My doctor I'm debating in Sweden has told me already that the Swedes will not blame China at all for any of the damage caused to their country. They won't even blame their own government. It's like something that happened, as if it came down from Mars.
Yes.
But they're thankful for China for supplying them with much needed medical equipment, masks, and things like that. And they don't want to look into the fact of the criminality of the communist Chinese regime. So they give communist China a pass for killing nearly 3,000 Swedes, but the same people would not blame the Palestinians or the Arabs for killing so many thousands of Jews and Israelis and continuing a slave policy. They'll say it's Israel's fault that they're doing this. Yeah. It's an inverted sort of anti-Semitism.
Yes. Barry, look, we're coming to the end of our session, and I want to thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a fascinating discussion. I'd like to ask David Adler, the President of the Australian Jewish Association, just to sum up and give a vote of thanks. David?
Thank you very much, Alan. Barry's been a friend of HAA for some years. We use some of his material. Barry, we need people like you who are clear, principled advocates for Israel. Many of the things you've said tonight, you will find the only organisation in this country that they will resonate with is our organisation, is HAA. We were formed to be a centre-right conservative voice politically, to be guided by Torah values. And when it comes to the concept of Israel, Eretz Yisrael is something we believe in. There's a tension between principle and political correctness, and we tend to side with principle rather than political correctness. We also see, you know, and Alan went a little bit down the track of raising the issue. There is a bit of a tensional gulf between some of the diaspora Jews, particularly those that are left of centre, and some of those that are, and the Jews in Israel. And our default position, we don't always agree with every policy of the Israeli government, but we recognise the principles and the situation of Israel, and we want to be clear supporters of the state of Israel. So I want to thank also the people who've joined us this evening. I noticed we had, we averaged about 70 logins. Some of those logins have 1, 2, 3 people, so we probably had 110, 120 people. And I want to say something, not to Barry, but to the others that are here. If you're not yet a member of AJA, we can't continue to do this work without the support of people in our community. I'm just about to put 2 links on the chat. One is a link as to where you can join HAA if you are not yet a member. It'll take you to an online application form, and everything we do incurs costs. If there's any way that any of you can provide some support, the second link is to our donation page, and big or small, whatever, it would be obviously more than welcome. Our plan is to have additional guests doing virtual events. We're ironing out the technology, and hopefully each time we do it, it'll be smoother and smoother, although I think I want to thank Alan for putting this together. And Erev Tov and Lehitraot.
Thanks, David. Thanks.
Alan, can I just follow up what David said with a very important final message to all your viewers and listeners? Ted was kind enough to mention my books. Part of my research is this: where you have a political party who becomes pro-Palestinian, that's fine, but they become anti-Israel. Where you have a political party that adopts an anti-Israel position, anti-Semitism very quickly follows. Happened in the Labour Party in Britain, it's happening in the Democratic Party in America, it can happen in Australia, in other European countries as well, where you have criticism of Israel, without criticism of the Palestinians, you will find that in its footsteps, anti-Semitism follows very quickly.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks again, Barry. It's wonderful chatting with you. We're going to close the meeting now. I'm going to unmute everybody. So it'll be
Thank all your people there for watching.
It'll be a case of the loudest voice gets to speak, but then people can choose whether to stay or leave. So thanks again, and good night to everybody.
Hello, Barry, from Michael.
Hello, well done.
Michael, how you doing?
Good. Otherwise, everything good?
Is it?
Okay.
Any control here?
No, there's no control. It's a free-for-all. So does anybody want to say anything?
Well done.
Barry?
Good show.
Barry?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Weekend Express or just regular?
Does somebody
You can
start
take
talking?
tomorrow off,
Yeah.
Shabbat. Barry,
There's a
no
lot
need
of
to
delays
join me on
it, so
Shabbat.
it could even be next week. It's just like,
Oh,
don't worry.
Alan, are you there?
I still am. Hang on a moment.
There's just
Hang
so
on a
many
moment.
places going on.
Show, gentlemen.
Put your hand up. Put your hand up.
I have to mute everybody. I just muted everybody because Barry wanted to say something.
I just wanted to know if any of them have any questions for me. I expected to have people's questions. I can see Morris there waving at me. Did anybody have any questions? Or,
Okay,
or
well, I'll unmute everybody. It's a
Oh,
bit-
Alan, I don't think you should. Alan, I think each person can unmute themselves if they
Okay.
have a question.
All right, okay. If anybody wants to...
Otherwise, it's a balagan.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
Lieberman and Lapid have a policy of wanting to get the Haredim to do their fair share. Now, I don't understand why they are then in opposition with Likud. If those two joined up with Likud, then Netanyahu wouldn't need to go with the religious. So the only other is that they just have a personal problem with him, and that's terrible.
It's a good point. By the way, how do you manage to get on Zoom when you're lying on a beach in Hawaii?
It's called a virtual life.
Actually, you're right. It's a very good question. Actually, a very good point, because I agree with you. It's the same. If the problem is that Lieberman, for instance, you're quite right. In a previous election, this was his main beef. But then he picked up so many enemies that he was firing in every direction. That's what I mentioned. He certainly wants the Haredis to pay their part in Israeli society, particularly in national service. But then he went off and he was against the Arabs, and then he was off against Bibi, and he just shooting from the hip at everybody. As for Lapid, yes, basically he could, but he has his own opinions, and Lapid's a very charismatic guy, good-looking guy, but a bit of an egoist. He sees himself as a prime minister, and he was part of the blue and white. He thought himself as being a chairman with Benny Gantz, but he didn't agree with Benny Gantz. He wanted to take the country in a completely different direction. He had his chance. I don't know what's going to happen. Why it's a good question, because I don't know what's going to happen to both Benny Gantz's party, whatever's left of blue and white, and what's going to be left of Yair Lapid's party and Moshe Ya'alon in opposition when it comes to a new election. Because the way it looks to me, Lapid, in a new election, Lapid and Ya'alon may be lucky if they get 6 seats. You know, that's no danger. There's no way you're going to create a government or become a prime minister with that sort of numbers. So it was a very good question, a very good point to make.
Yeah, if anybody else wants to ask a question, just unmute yourself, and Morris, just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Eric, can you tell us how critical Hauser and Hendel was in this whole thing?
Very.
Have they got a big future now, given that?
No, well, they came from the centre right. Let's remember, okay, and they were sort of part of anyone but Bibi. But then they sort of came to their senses when they saw that what was happening in the party that they had linked up to. And they decided they were the ones that actually set the crack in the blue and white. And basically on the issue that I raised before, that blue and white were there to do some sort of coalition with the Joint Arab List. Not that the Joint Arab List would have been in the government, but they would have been part of their external coalition, if you want to put it that. And they realized this isn't the direction that they were heading. They wanted to head politically.
Yeah. If somebody wants to ask a question, it's somebody.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Barry, has Bibi thought or planned any succession plan for after he eventually steps down? And what is a possible role for an up-and-coming potential leader like Gideon Saar?
Yes. Yeah. In my opinion, when we get to the end of days with Bibi, I think Gideon Saar would be my idea, idea of the guy who would be more effective in heading the Likud, but he's going to have a hard battle against people like Yaakov Katz and maybe Yaakov Katz. Who else am I thinking of? I've forgotten his name right now. I've got to blame the guy who heads the Strategic Affairs Ministry and the police. I'll remember it. I should know him because I deal with him all the time with the Strategic Affairs.
Senior moment.
Well done.
Yeah, right. So quite right. Yeah, but the main bulldozer. I think the fight off will be between Gideon Saar and Yaakov Katz.
Okay.
Barry, people I respect in Israel say that there's no way known that Bibi will hand over in 18 months. If he doesn't, and he pulls a stunt, and it goes to election, how do you think the electorate will view that?
We talked about that, Morris. That was at the beginning.
Well, I understand, but
yeah. Right. I know, but Morris, I think Bibi's too foxy for that. Don't forget, for the next year or so, he's going to be involved in the trial. He doesn't have to be in court every day. For the first few months, his lawyer's going to deal with everything. It's going to drag out a little bit, but I think he'll play the game that I outlined, that he would, instead of serving 18 months, he'll serve about a year, and then say, Benny, you take over. I'm busy. I've got other things to do. This is your chance to shine. And by the way, you've got to give me 6 months back at the end. And then he would leave that government as a prime minister.
I have a question for you, Barry.
Yeah.
What is the general consensus at the moment in Israel regarding Trump's peace plan?
They're not against it. We're taking an Israeli cynical position. We'll say yes, and the Palestinians will always say no. And it's happening. And what's going to happen is why we will say yes, and the other people and the Palestinians will say no, is this will play in our hands with regard to the more moderate Arab states who look on Iran as more of a danger than Israel. In fact, there is a lot of increasing amount of business going on right now between Israel and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. A lot of business in the billions, but this is COVID, not spoken about. And they look at Israel and America as their bulwark against an ambitious hegemony of coming from Iran. And they will play the game and say, well, we support the Palestinians, but when the Palestinians don't step up to the plate, they will ditch them like anything. Incidentally, some news for you people. Alan, I don't know if you heard this as well, but we're expecting to hear over the next few days some deal going on between Israel and Hamas for the release of our missing soldiers and civilians who were in Gaza.
Well, it's been a long time coming.
There's a deal just being finalized in which we're going to release the recaptured terrorists, the ones that we released when, what's his name, Gidon Shalit was released. and then they were recaptured. And there's a deal just being completed as I'm speaking to you. We may hear about it before weekend, that a deal's going to be done. I understand that the Israeli government have spoken to the families of the missing Israelis. It's got that far.
Wow.
Here's a question for you, if I may ask. Here's a question for you, Barry, if I may ask. Given that you predict the imminent, incipient demise of Lieberman, shouldn't Bibi Netanyahu not go ahead with this ridiculous multiplicity of governments and then just call for a new election, because there should be enough leaks of votes from Lieberman to him to ensure that he can form a government in his own right?
I'm not sure if I heard the question correctly. Something about Lieberman.
Well, if Lieberman's going to collapse and lose support anyway, is it not better to go to a fourth election in the hope that Bibi will pick up those votes?
I'll pick them up anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. I understand. No, I'll be cynically honest here. The reason that that Bibi grabbed onto to Gantz's offer is because the big gorilla on Bibi's shoulder is the upcoming trial.
The trial.
Didn't have time to go for a fourth election with this coming up. He wanted to leave himself in power as the trial began. And this was the best, and when Gantz reached out for him, this was the best opportunity, better than playing around with an untrustworthy Lieberman.
Okay.
Barry,
Okay.
thanks.
Barry, I have a question for you.
Can I have a question?
Barry, can I ask you a question?
Who's speaking?
Dennis Liddell.
Oh, okay. You
Barry,
go.
my question is, what part does Sarah Netanyahu play? Because I know when I was living there, she played a big part in getting rid of some of Bibi's opponents for various different reasons. Do you think that she has any part in it?
You know what Sarah, Bibi's wife, is called here in Israel?
I'm afraid to ask.
Miss Piggy.
Yeah. Doesn't change.
I name a character but you're right. If the rumors are true, and there are too many rumors come from different directions, she's having too much of an influence. And I think basically also in the last couple of years, I think also Bibi developed a sort of isolationist thing, because he was getting it from different directions. He went into his sort of personality-wise, went into a sort of a shell. She has, I think, had a certain an influence. Maybe as a comforter as well, and maybe, you know, you're a misservice. But at the same time, I have a distant view about Bibi. I think he'd like to carry on after 2023 as Prime Minister. But I see a different future for Bibi, which would be absolutely wonderful for his wife. And that is, he could be the future President of the State of Israel.
No.
That would suit her down to the ground. You know, she could be the First Lady. She always thinks she is.
Exactly.
Right
Yes.
now.
That'd
be perfect.
A very important issue is the appointment of judges. We see that problem both here and in the United States, the continuous lawfare of the judges to make law instead of a judge. So who is going to be the Minister of Justice, and how will we decide on who gets appointed to the judiciary? That is something that Shakir did very, very well indeed. And the rogue left into line, but what's going to happen now?
Again, another good question, Brian, because I touched on that when the talk I gave before, that I have a fear that the next Justice Minister will be this Avi Nissenkorn, who was the head of the Histadrut, the trade union.
Right.
And if there's any monkey business going on, he could be trying to do something with the Attorney General to try and, again, stitch up Bibi, despite the fact that there are various conditions. This agreement, this unity government agreement, had about 80, I think at least 80 pages of all sort of conditions. This is why it was more like a divorce agreement rather than a marriage ketubah, because neither side trusts the other. And I don't trust Avi Nissenkov, and there's some deep suspicion going on right now that maybe also the Attorney General, Mandelblit, is also, you know, doing some wheeler dealing as the Attorney General to do with the case of Bibi's case. And basically Bibi's case is dealing with things. When I talk to people in America, it's unbelievable, because what he's being accused of is he's accused of what? Of giving some of the editors of newspapers favors for getting positive publicity. You tell me in Australia, you have any politicians who don't want positive publicity? But there's no evidence that any of the editors received any favors. You know what I'm saying? Oh, he received bribes also from a Hollywood movie mogul who, every time he came to Israel, brought him cigars and brought his wife, Miss Piggy, pink champagne. But, you know, the case that would be made out is, yes, he received all these gifts of cigars and champagne, but what favors did this movie mogul receive? So Bibi is quite adamant that all these accusations are trumped up charges. It's funny I should use the phrase trumped up charges, because President Trump has had all these sort of indictments going over his head for almost like the nearly 4 years he's been president of the United States since day one. And so far the indictments and the impeachments haven't led to anything.
So Barry, what do you think will happen with Netanyahu's case?
I think he'll be found innocent, because I think that if he's found guilty of what? Eliciting favors from the media, every prime minister, every minister of every government in the whole world, in the democratic world particularly, would have to be put on charges.
Barry, just make a suggestion on how to control Zoom. The best method is, if somebody wants to speak, they should go to their reaction button and put up their hand like that.
Yes.
And either Alan or David can note who put their hand up and call them to unmute. That's the best way to control a Zoom conference.
Okay.
I've got no control.
Brian.
That's Alan's.
Thanks, Brian. That was a good point. Anybody else want to ask a question? We're just about to finish.
Yeah. I've been trying to. I just wondered what the American position on the unity government was, and if Mr. Freedman, the ambassador, has made any comments, or Trump.
No, I think he stayed silent on that, but I think he's in favour. I'll look it up, but I haven't read or seen anything in which he's opinionated on that. I think he made some bland thing that you know, the Trump administration will be happy to deal with whichever government is, you know, those diplomatic language sort of things. I don't think he's come out with a personal opinion saying, yeah, this is great. He more or less said, to the effect that the Trump administration is very happy that Israel is not for a fourth election. They've agreed a unity government, and the Trump administration stands ready to work with whatever government is formed.
Because
he's going to take the tip.
True, because at one stage he was very frustrated that they didn't have a government that they could work with.
Yeah. That, you know, who knows whether this government is capable of moving things forward with the Trump plan, even when the time comes. Having said that, Trump was clever that as well as inviting Bibi to the White House, he also invited Benny Gantz. Now, Benny Gantz didn't agree to go into the meeting together with Bibi. He had a separate meeting with President Trump. So they had a sort of get-to-know-you sort of talk. And then Gantz came back and said he's very good. He will work with the Trump administration. The plan is very sound, etc., etc. So he made it the right noises. David, you have anything to add to that?
No, it doesn't
David.
look like it.
Oh, I saw him muttering something.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, last call. Any one more question? Anybody? No? Okay. All right, we'll call it a night, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been fabulous. really interesting format. I like this. I like this way that it's worked.
Went off technically quite well.
It did very good, and it was good to have this sort of question time at the end, and it gave people an opportunity to say something. And those that didn't want to can leave it as they wish. Barry,
Alan,
thanks again.
Alan, I want to add, before you cut me off, I just wanted to ask, when you've got the link to you got the link to the proper program and this Q&A is included or not? Once you get the link, send it to me.
Sure.
And I will bang it out on my global social media platforms.
Okay, just before we go, Barry, tell everybody about the Israeli Institute for Strategic Studies.
All right, the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies was founded by Dr. Martin Sherman, who departed other strategic institutes because they were swinging far too far to the left and too accommodating. This is going back decades, by the way, I'm not talking now. He came from a military intelligence background, and he was involved with the government and everything. But he found that people were getting really too enamored over, again, peace with the Palestinians, peace with Yasser Arafat, even at that time. And he, like me, came from a background of real politics and said, you know, this guy, there's no way you can make peace with Arafat or any of them. They have a completely different agenda. And coming from military intelligence, he expressed what their agenda is, and they haven't departed from it. But you do get others like Amos Yadlin or whatever, who feel there's no option but to make an accommodation with the Arafats and the Mahmoud Abbas and the Hamases or whatever. Martin believes something else, and I tend to subscribe to most of what he says, is that you can't make peace with people who want to kill you.
No.
It keeps, and you know, when you start going on this progressive ride, you somehow have to either apply the brakes or hit the brick wall of truth and real politics. You understand what I'm saying? People have taken that ride, are perplexed why we don't end up with peace. And they can't get down from their camel and say it was the Palestinians' fault, because it's like insulting a minority, or you may be accused of being a racist or whatever. So it's easier to convert Israel as being the European colonialists, or supporting the imperial Americans or capitalists or whatever they want to hit Israel with, the occupiers, the racists.
Yeah, yeah.
They do everything in their derangement except face up to the facts. And if, like I said to you, Alan, before on the program, all these people, if you have these people, make them address one thing. Fine. If you believe in a two-state solution, go to Gaza City, sit with the leadership of Hamas, come back to me and say they are prepared to live next door to a Jewish state.
No, never.
When they say that, you know, don't forget the majority of Israelis years ago, two-state solution, probably around 68, 70% were prepared to sign on for a two-state solution. Not today.
No, no.
We didn't change, neither did the enemy. The only thing that changed is we recognize them as the enemy, not as the peacemakers.
Absolutely.
Convert the enemy into peacemakers, you will have peace.
Okay, on that.
You get me to Australia, that is always going to be my message.
Yes. Okay, and on that note, we'll thank you again and say good night to everybody. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Alan.
And we'll do this again very, very soon. Good night to everybody.
Right, and don't forget the link.
Night, Barry.
No.
Night, David. Thanks, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Good night, all.
Thank you. Good night.
Well done, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.